Hello, everybody. I think we are ready to start the last session of the day. And the room is warming up. I know it was a bit cold, but it's warming up, I hope, in many senses, so that we can go towards the plenary session where all the unanswered questions, the undiscussed topics will be addressed. But first, we have a last contribution that is by Pelin and is ending notes for the complementary notes, ending notes for the whole symposium. And I'm glad to introduce Pelin to all of you. Pelin Tan is a sociologist and art historian who is currently associate professor at the Department of Architecture at Mardin Artuklu University, and visited as a research professor of design at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. She completed her PhD on locality in urban art practices at Istanbul Technical University and her postdoctoral study on artistic research methodology at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Cambridge. She's a principal researcher of the spatio-social analysis of refugee camps in Southeast Turkey project at Mardin University, and the lead author of Towards an Urban Society, the International Panel on Social Progress. And she contributed to publications on architecture, urbanism, and art, such as 2000 Plus, The Urgency of Architectural Theory, and The Silent University Towards a Transversal Pedagogy. Pelin Tan lives and works in Mardin. The floor is yours, Pelin.
Thank you very much for inviting me to Tom Hollert, Maria Leova, and Matteo. There is my presentation. I'm very lucky. I have 45 minutes, but I'm trying to be not so boring and long. I will. First, I have two things in my presentation. One is that how I'm in my teaching, in my research, how I'm discussing on alternative pedagogy or decolonizing strategies, and decolonizing pedagogies. And secondly, I will a little bit explain what we are doing in Mardin, in the southeast of Turkey. I'm coming from a very strict education of sociology, a very strict methodological education, and then I did a master and PhD in art history, which is a double dose of methodology. And I was always involved in art practice, in art, contemporary art. And luckily, I was involved. I left sociology and art history. And I don't think I call myself sociologist or art historian anymore. I started to work a lot with artists, especially in urban space. And then I moved with a larger context in different cities and different territories. And I previously, it's been talked all day, many references that I use a lot too. And I tried to start. I tried to start little maps like that. It's difficult to read, I think, but this I did in 2012, and then I went to a larger one in 2015. It's a very metaphorical. I call it the map of revolution of decolonizing pedagogies. All are problematic, I think. It's not so easy to. As it looks like. But I was trying to bring institutional practice. I'm a governmental worker, full-time. I have a good salary. I'm not a precarious person. And I work since over 15 years in a Turkish state university. And this is something, a position, I think, to define. Although I focused a lot on precarious condition and too. What is going on in the description of the pamphlet, in the introduction of Maria, about Bologna process, about neoliberalism, this is very global common, same for Turkey too. We have private universities, we have state universities, and we have Bologna process, and center universities like universities in Ankara and Istanbul are the main institutional structures. They are very much filled and backed up with Kemalist, nationalist, homogenizing ideologies, and you have to teach into through that, and this is very hard work. And most of my friends asking me how I survived since 15 years in such a position, especially in the last 1 year, which is getting more hard to keep your position and try to sustain and really work inside the institution. There is one dilemma I had. I'm sure you all have this too. One is, when we speak about decolonization in pedagogy or collective thinking, especially about after Occupy movements, it's always about non-institutional practice. I mean, we will go out from institution, we will go out from academia, and then we will invent urban pedagogy, we will invent collective pedagogy. And there is always a play between institutionalism and non-institutional structure. But we know that universities are academias. I know that in the previous panel, some people from the audience were speaking about, pointing out about high schools and primary schools or kindergarten, but I'm speaking about higher education through my own experience. There is one way. Either you do work through the institution, inside the institution, you have to fight a lot. Or you go out from the institution. Here, institution is academia, university, not an art institution, and you invent outside something. I'm always in a dilemma. Either I want to leave or I don't want to leave. In between. And I'm trying to, some of my practice I do in the faculty, inside in the institution, but for political reason I have to do outside of academy, other practice, other project too. So I have to always balance and work in a very cyclic way. I want to speak about collective thinking, collective process. I think Maria we talked last week, and we wanted me to press on, and I already had something to written, how to think collectively, how is possible to create collective common knowledge. I mean, this is I think a discussion. In the previous panel we had the two. Some people they reject simply. The reason for that is neutralism, antagonism can be reduced in a common knowledge, collective thinking. And if we occupy or if we are squatting a place, an institution or a non-institutional space, it doesn't mean that we are constructing collective thinking, collective action. I think it's not so easy. The day after, after the revolution, after the Occupy, after the squatting, whatever you call, the day after, collective thinking, collective action, collective consciousness, collective imagination doesn't really work in a way that we imagined before. I think this is also a kind of important to think of how it can be possible. You have an institution, in my case, you have the infrastructure, and you want to set up a collective action, collective thinking. It's not possible. It's possible, but not possible. Is very difficult. I often refer to Gibson Graham's economical geographer thinkers, Julie Graham, Catherine Gibson's research, also as a teacher, how they worked with their student, postgraduate student and student. in context of space and territory, because my practice is mostly about that too. This is why I'm very much influenced by their texts and teaching and ideas, and how they are trying to understand collective action, and how to keep the instituting practice without really being institutionalized, but play with the norms. Just to remind, I'm sure all of you know, most of you know what they're saying. The collective in this context doesn't suggest the massing together if like subjects, nor should the term action imply on efficiency that originates in the intentional beings, or that is distinct from thought. We are trying for a broad and distributed notion of collective action in order to recognize and keep open possibilities of connection and redevelopment. I mean, this is maybe general reference from by Gibson Graham, but I'm trying to invest and think in their frame of reference, both their theoretical approach and also on heterogeneous economy, on social surplus, on institutional criticism, and also their pedagogical identity, how they worked with their students, how they proceeded collective heterogeneous economic research in different territories. I want to come back with my experience later with this words, things, territory, and pedagogy that brings, I think, frames what I want to say. And I'm trying to research and understand theoretically and also through my practice, I think both the same, how a transversal instituting practice is possible. Guattari doesn't describe transversal methodology, but he describes in one interview transversal, what is transversal. Neither institutional therapy, nor institutional pedagogy, nor of the struggle of social movement, social emancipation, but which invoke an analytical method that could transverse these multiple fields from which came the thema transversality. So I'm trying to use and understand Guattari's practice as an activist, as a writer, and many, I think, texts has been written also on transversal methods, and how to put into one of the main book, maybe you know about methods, assemblage method is by John Law. And I'm trying to bring a kind of a methodology research. I found myself teaching research methodology since 10 years. Before I hated to work on methods and methodology, but now I found myself more teaching, especially to architecture students, on methods, and also in our research trying to figure out how we can create a transversal methods towards a territory, especially a territory which is very politically defined, overwhelmed. There are many spaces of pedagogy. I mean, the space, what is the space and place of pedagogy? There are many non-institutional spaces, still has an institutional gests that we cannot leave. This is one of the meetings we organized during the occupation of Gezi about going beyond voluntary labor and thinking about action labor and open urban pedagogies, how we can find a space outside of university and sit and read and discuss. And many academics are doing this now, especially in Turkey, because some of them lost their job, and there is an initiative, Academic for Peace, started meetings and teaching outside where they can be hosted in any places of public space. Yeah, this is the tricky. Yeah. This is another. I'm sure you know. After Occupy New York, some of my friends, they were running a meeting near the sculpture in Union Square, kind of readings on commons and learning from each other. I think this book, I find it important. It's been published in Rotterdam, actually, Nomadic Education. It's a kind of articles and chapter about influenced by Deleuzian thought and Guattari's ideas. And thinking about nomadic education, we in the faculty, I will come back a little bit more on that. We started to work together with some translocal realities, people, friends who are facing the same process, territorial realities, as in Mardin, as in Southeast Turkey. Campus in Camp is one of the education platform meeting, pedagogy platform in Palestine, in Campus in Camp, Daisheh refugee camp. We are doing with our students the initiation, and me and my students and colleagues, we are try to meet every year and running a workshop together. They have a little space in the camp and a library that they are running their readings and discussion, the Edward Said Library they called. And it's young Palestinian, third generation of Palestinian youth, young people. And last year, they constructed a tent with Alessandro Petti and Sandy Hilal, and we met again with my student. My students are mostly Arab and Kurds, so we try to compare two territories of spatial colonization and the question of autonomy. We took 3 days together in different Daisheh camp and Favar camp, and try to put this workshop in a curriculum, in an architectural studio curriculum, which is very difficult to do it. And I will come back to discuss about that. And we're trying to share and create together a common knowledge, although it is a kind of different geography. I would like to come where I'm coming from, where I'm working. This is the architecture faculty in Mardin. Mardin is southeast of Turkey, in a highly populated Kurdish and Arabic populated region. And Mardin is used to be a Christian Arab Assyrian city, and now is mostly highly Kurdish populated and Sunni Muslim Arabs population. And since the faculty was established 6 years ago, and by my colleagues, and they invited me to take part, to be together with the aim of running an alternative education in architecture. Because we were fed up with the education in Istanbul and in Ankara. And we wanted to have more social politically engaged architecture education. Maybe it sounds in an international context not so interesting, but for Turkey, for our local context, was very important. And the second reason was that there was a peace process between Turkish government and the Kurdish movement, and we wanted to contribute. The aim of the faculty, the aim of the university was to contribute the peace process, which was failed last year summer, and the conflict started again. And the faculty is half an hour near to Syrian border, so it's also under the influence effect of the Syrian war. we have an undergrad education, we have a postgraduate education and PhD, and the good news is that I'm the dean of the faculty. The bad news is that I'm the dean of the faculty. So you want to do something and you have the power, institutional power. You can change the curriculum, you can play with the diploma project, you can play with the studio, but then you cannot. Or you have to be really creating a subtle methods to do it. I want to say something, maybe most of you know, I'm not a trained architect, but working 15 years in architecture faculty, I know that design studios are the backbone of the architecture faculties. It's different than art history education or social science education. First, you design studios, and decide the topic of the diploma project every term, and then you put the elective courses around the studio, which feeds the studio, and the studio is fed by the elective courses too. So we have elective courses, social theory, and then we have a studio, second-year studio on reconstructing on one neighborhood or something. So this is a little kind of standard architectural education, and I was thinking with my colleague, we wanted to make a difference in terms of topic. We are in a very political era. We are basically colonizer. We are Turkish. We don't know how to speak Arab and Kurdish, but the Kurds and Arabs, they know how to speak Turkish, and the students are all mainly, most of them are Kurds and Arabs. So I had the two struggle. One is I had to decolonize myself, and then also decolonize the epistemological foundation of architectural topics and theory and history, the whole architectural knowledge, and how is this possible? I mean, how can you teach that an Ottoman house is not a Turkish house? This is what is written normally in Turkish architectural history, that, or say it another way, a Turkish house is an Ottoman house, is an eclectic style of motive of house, but it's not a Turkish house. That is often been taught in architectural education, which I think is a very basic colonizing knowledge, because the Turkish house doesn't exist. Or if a Kurdish student comes and tells me that they want to set up a Kurdish style architecture, kind of a nationalistic way, I say no. I mean, we are against Turkish nationalistic architecture, so we are against Kurdish nationalist architecture too. So the colonized subject is learning the language and coming to you and saying that in the same way, with the same language, to the colonizers, or something like that. So I had a big confusion to really clean out the whole mess. It took, and it takes long time. It's like in Turkish we say, peeing the wall to make a hole. Yeah. So it's a long way to do, and is often a failure, and it makes very much sense what we are living through now, not only in Turkey but around in the geographical context. There was two important points today morning. Kaspar spoke about, mentioned about after revolution, after the day after. You know, how we're going to reconstruct ourselves, how to really go without hierarchy, go without collective problems of collective decision making and so on. And the second, Tom was mentioning about Benjamin, referring to Benjamin, how we can continue. I mean, you wake up. How can you wake up every day and say, "Oh, I'm not arrested yet. Yes, let's continue a little bit more. Let's continue a little bit more," and it's very personal talks maybe they had, but it makes so much sense in my case too, or in all case too, how in an institution in this kind of geography, in this kind of institutional educational structure, which is also a global international problem, you have to deal with two things and continue to set what kind of pedagogy you're dreaming of. This is, I want to give a little bit more information. I thought yesterday night to put quickly what we worked this week. Next week we are starting the second term. And it was a hard 2 terms for us because we had curfews. And we have students whose father are mayors who were arrested. We have students who cannot come out from their cities because of the urban warfare. And most of my colleagues, they don't want to live in Mardin. They left to Istanbul. And so it's difficult to maintain, and every term is a new beginning. End of the term, we say we will finish this story, but then every new term we start again to. And next week we are starting, and we just wanted to show what we're doing. One studio is about Dara village. Dara is a Kurdish village. It's 20 minutes far from my faculty. It's an old Roman garrison, an old beautiful. Hellenistic city also, and the village sits on the top of those historical layers, and is still in the border of near the border of Syria, and we're going to work. I mean, I'm just giving some information what we're doing. We are working on the village to understand Dara in a through cosmological framework. I mean, cosmos in Deleuze or cosmos in Ibn Tufayl, the Islamic thinker, how they understand cosmos, and be comparing, and we try to understand the life, non-life and life forms of Dara. This is one example. Normally, most people don't even go there because it's because of the political condition, but we try to use every or surrounding and southeast of Anatolia, any territory that we can work in the studios, also in the courses. For example, the diploma project. I mean, on the diploma in architecture, schools are main studio. I wanted to really destroy and remove the diploma for a long time. But my friend says, I'm not an architect, you don't understand, they say. But we try to make as much interesting the diploma and free floating knowledge use as much as we can. We're going to work in a city, Adana. Adana is near to Antioch, southwest of east of Turkey, and is a city very well developed, and it lies on a the hinterland of Adana is agricultural land. So we're working on the idea with the approach of Anthropocene discussion and how to work on the city of Adana. The students often we try to give them an understanding that if you are going to graduate, you don't need to build a building as an architect. You can do something else. You can do other practices. And we try to offer as much as we can understanding of different kind of practices, not to also for ourselves to take our pedagogical strategy, not feeding the architectural offices that is often is a desire, but in the other way around, to really reject this kind of straight neoliberal connection and try to give an understanding to the architect who's going to be an architect, who's going to graduate. They can find a different kind of practice. They can invent another kind of practice. They don't need to build. They don't need to work in a 40, 80 mainstream architectural office. So we're trying to work on that too. This is Rosie brought this in Turkish book, Posthumanism, İnsan Sonrası, Turkish translation. we worked. We every year we're repeating. We're working on the labor condition of architecture and designers. This is a studio that mostly my female planners and architects. They did run a research in Diyarbakır, Mardin, Batman, Kızıltepe, this whole region. About how many hours architects are working, how much they are spending in home, weekends, how many of them are unemployed. And we used Graph Commons, graphscommon.com. You can go and is a kind of a mapping. We transferred all the survey to kind of a mapping. And recently, since 1 year, we worked on a Iraqi Ezidi camp near 1 hour far from Mardin. We surrounded by refugee camps. Some of them are self-organized camps. Some of them are governmental-run camps. This is a booklet that we just recently, last week, we finished. You can ask me, I can send you the PDF, I can give it. We worked in a camp. The refugees, they built their own tent. They transformed their tent into living complex with their own design and with their own material. So we tried to map this their design with architectural technique and representational techniques. So it's not like we try to teach not to design camp for the refugees, but other way around, to learn their design and transform it, archive it into architectural technique. I can show more, but it's better I can give the PDF if you're interested. I have also master students, Syrian refugees. Turkish government gives right for education, continue their education. They cannot leave the country. They don't have passport, but they have education, proper right to enter the education. So I have also Syrian master students. So we work all together. We did many camp research since 3-4 years, because our bus terminal was transformed into a temporary camp for 6 months, and then there was an art gallery, was transformed into hosting refugees for some weeks. So we were focusing on temporary spaces and how to learn of their dwelling, process of dwelling, how to organize themselves, how solidarity practice has been built, and how to map them all together. I'm lucky because they speak the same language, Kurdish and Arabic, and it's more easy to access, when you speak their language, and get more into inside their life, everyday life, and help them, and they help you too, both sides. And this camp is removed now, because it was under the management of 2 municipalities of Diyarbakır, but the mayors were arrested and have been arrested, and the government has a controller now in the municipality. I don't know how it's called in English. And they destroyed the camp 2-3 weeks ago, and I think more than 1,000 refugees, they moved to official camps. The camp was run by few local Kurdish municipality and by Rojava Solidarity organization, association. And this was a big, I mean, with the other temporary camps, this was a challenge for the student to understand the design, self-design practice, I would say. I'm going to, I don't know how minutes I have. I want to read a manifesto that we wrote with Ahmet Öğüt. But before that, I want to say something about what we call decolonization. I'm going to read from my text because I don't remember what I written, but I did some. I think it needs to be researched and talked, discussed a lot. Decolonization. I think in Western Europe and in US has a different meaning. It's more like colonizer and colonized, two partners, very dualistic structure, and I thought it's a bit more complex in southeast of Turkey. There are more communities, and the communities in between they have different level of racism. Kurds, Arab, Turks, and then it differs also with religion sect also. So it's more complex. Of the colonization, the concept of the colonization is more complex, and it differs, I think, a little bit. So from the European context of colonization, but although we read Fanon, we read representation on visual representation, other post-colonial thinkers that was mentioned today. We have the perfect Turkish translations, all of them. But still, I think it needs more kind of unique understanding, research in different territories, which is, I find, is more complex in Turkey. I was looking a little bit that are we using decolonization as a metaphor? Is it really that I'm practicing as working with methods or curriculum, or in an institutional structure? So I went to some research, and in one of my texts, I'm referring to two researchers, Tuk and Yang, that they written in 2012 about decolonization as a metaphor. They argue, I'm just reading quickly and then go back to the manifesto. Tung and Yang argue that decolonization is a metaphor. The easy adoption of decolonizing discourse by educational advocacy and scholarship, evidenced by the increasing number of calls to decolonize our schools or use decolonizing methods, or decolonize student thinking, turns decolonization into a metaphor. The critical stance they elaborate in their article gives a deep insight to help understand why we use this term in the context of pedagogy. They continue, decolonization as metaphor allows people to equivocate these contradictory decolonial desires because it turns decolonization into an empty signifier to be filled by any track towards liberation. For them, an anti-colonial critique and decolonization are slightly different things. I think their critique helps give a better understanding of this term. Yet the dualistic structure of colonizer-oppressed subjectivities are more complex today and is relative from territory to territory. In my opinion, using the word as a metaphor still grants us emancipative power to reconsider our methodologies, the process-based research tools, the complex realities of territories, and the actors of the social production of architecture. This was a text that I mostly focused on architecture, but I'm still working and thinking, and it could be good to bring different territorial cases in discussing what is the term historically, theoretically, colonization, and what we meaning altogether when we are speaking about pedagogy. What is decolonization, decolonizing pedagogy, the pedagogies of decolonization, whatever. I think this is something that we can go and discuss. For me, it's confusing. Maybe I'm experiencing in the faculty more, and then with the terms more. I have 5 minutes left. We wrote this manifesto with Ahmed. It was the Refugee Day that we did 2 years ago, and was edited by Matteo Lucetti. I want to read it and close my talk. Towards a transversal pedagogy, the Silent University Principles and Demands. Maybe you know the project. Silent University is a refugee platform, asylum seeker migrant platform that was initiated by artist Ahmet Öğüt. First, one, everybody has a right to educate. Two, immediate acknowledgement of academic backgrounds of asylum seekers and refugees. Three, acting knowledge without language limitations. Four, acting knowledge without legal limitations. Five, participatory modes of usership. Six, artistic pedagogical practice need to be emancipated from commonly used terminology such as projects and workshop. Seven, pedagogical practices must be based on long-term engagement, commitment, and determination. Eight, we act in solidarity with other refugee struggles and collectives around the world. Nine, extraterritorial, translocal knowledge production and conflict urbanism must be priorities. 10, decentralized, participatory, horizontal, and autonomous modality of education instead of centralized, authoritarian, oppressive, and compulsory education. 11, acting beyond limitation of border politics. 12, autocracy instead bureaucracy. 13, action knowledge can only be produced through assemblage methods. 14, revolution of decolonizing pedagogies. This is what we're aiming, but I want to say also as a self-critic, we are all well educated, you know, from MIT, from Istanbul Technical University to this and that and this. We have all the tenureship and the PhDs and so on. All of us in this salon, and we are talking about decolonization pedagogies. It could have been good to have someone that doesn't have none of those diplomas and to speak also. I think closing this session, my talk, and all. I think it's a kind of a starting point to think of that, to go further, and I don't want to be always the representative person to speak about as a well-educated female and non-precare, full tenured professor person. But we should widen up more, I think, to talk about. And my last comment will be that to really a little bit more define architectural education, art education, art history education, and social science. I mean, we think that all be mixing up in art practice. We are free to enlarge and transverse those knowledge and methods, but in an institution, it's really hard to do it in an educational institution. I think we can speak also about that too. I think I didn't forget anything. Thank you very much. So.